Over the past few weeks, the Trump administration has been ramping up one of the most effective tactics for combating all the fake news.
No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
We've been hearing a lot about fake news over the last couple of years. But what does it mean? Fake news and liberal bias has been wrapped in political discourse for nearly 60 years, but to get an understanding of the modern day term, we have to look back to this man, Barry Goldwater, the 1964 Republican presidential nominee and the godfather of blame it on the fake news media.
And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
But this was the 1960s, and in the midst of a growing anti-war and civil rights movement, he took a hardline approach against his opponent, Nelson Rockefeller, who Goldwater viewed as a moderate Republican and having too soft a stance on communism. And it's important to remember what was happening. This was probably one of the scariest portions of the Cold War. On the heels of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a presidential assassination, and a growing uncomfortability with the perceived escalating tensions with the Soviet Union, people were scared that a Goldwater presidency would lead to nuclear war. But as Goldwater began struggling in the polls with his controversial platform, instead of adjusting his talking points or emboldening a more centrist view of him politically, he did what any stable genius would do. He handed out campaign pins to reporters that read Eastern Liberal Press and criticized them any chance he had, and kept pushing that his stance on rolling back the New Deal and going to blow the red right out of the commies. He continued claiming his stances were popular with Americans. After a blowout loss to LBJ, where Goldwater would carry just 5 U.S. states and lead to massive wipeouts of Republicans at all levels of office, he doubled down and insisted that the press misrepresented his views, and that was the only reason he lost. We actually used to refer to journalists and news stations as the press. Well, that's until Richard Nixon decided he'd start referring to them as the media. He did this because he felt like it was more ominous sounding, and he was convinced the media was anti-Nixon rather than anti-conservative or anything like that.
If they're against a candidate, I want them to stay it.
And the ultimate of ironies, however, this type of paranoia would fall and haunt him to his own undoing.
Has dominated the news media. During the past 3 months, the three major networks have devoted an average of over 22 hours of television time each week to this subject.
See, Watergate was without a doubt a complicated situation, but long before Nixon's famous "I am not a crook" speech, he would use his first official addressing of the nation as a time to imply the whole situation was a product of the same anti-Nixon media he had been talking about for years. Good thing we secretly taped all our conversations. It'd be a shame if the media tried to create a fake scandal without my own evidence to introduce. Whoops. And sometime before Watergate, a later uncovered memo titled "A Plan for Putting the GOP on TV News" was circulated. And while it's still not known who wrote this memo exactly, handwriting can be found scribbled across the edges and signed, "Love, Roger." Okay, no, it just says "Best regards, Roger." But this was confirmed later to be the handwriting of Roger Ailes, the mastermind of Fox News. See, this memo lays out the plan to create a pro-GOP news television under the reasoning that people are lazy. With television, you just sit and watch and listen. The thinking is done for you. Now, maybe one of the funniest coincidences is this part. One of the possible reasons this idea might be rejected is the fear of outcry from local Democrats on overbalancing a news problem. Where have we heard that term with news before? Right, we'll get to that later. But there was a problem brewing in America, and after Walter Cronkite would give his final sign-off as the most trusted man in America, with over a 80% approval rating, America just couldn't get enough.
And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6, 1981.
At this point, we were hooked. There's nothing you could do. CNN launched in 1980 as the first 24-hour news network, followed by the Financial Times in 1981. We know those guys aren't sleeping. CNBCQ came along in 1989, and as satellite and cable television filled American homes, the golden age of television news had begun. As the ratings and money kept coming in, these tycoons and news kept buying, and traditional television news started to look the same.
We are concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
By the 1990s, the trends had become clear. People in general did not trust their 24-hour news networks. But there was a clear divide on political affiliation with who trusted it. and the seeds planted nearly 40 years prior by the likes of Barry Goldwater and Richard Nixon had fully blossomed. And in 1996, Roger Ailes would make good on his promise and answer the call for balanced news reporting. Fox News became a powerhouse, with shows like The O'Reilly Factor, which held the spot of the highest-rated cable news program for 16 years. These ratings couldn't be ignored, and as CNN and MSNBC began changing in response to the Fox News ratings giant, the line between journalism and partisanship became more ambiguous than ever before. As all major news networks became increasingly polarized, combined with the public's general distrust of them, people began making it online, searching for different sources of information, where a whole new digital Wild West was beginning to develop. Anyone with an internet connection and basic programming knowledge could make their voice heard. No longer bound by mainstream confines, there was an explosion of alternative media. Sites like The Blaze, Breitbart, and the Daily Wire stepped in to fill a growing void of a distrustful consumer. But there was one major issue with trying to grow an online presence in the early 2000s, and that problem was about to be solved by social media. As sites like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter gained popularity, there was finally a common meeting place for people to gather from all edges of the internet. And it wasn't just for meeting up with friends and chatting anymore, but sharing videos, blog posts, shouting out your favorite band, all finding their ways to your timeline. But something was beginning to fester. In order to make social media websites free to use, they needed to attract advertisers, and programs like Google's AdSense would pave the way for a new generation of wealth creation online. Content creators and influencers were making good livings posting videos, blogging, and in some cases, just having followers. The term clickbait was first used by, of all people, a blogger in 2006, and it put a new term on a growing trend in these communities. So in order to get that sweet, sweet ad money, you needed viewers. In order to get viewers, you need to get people's attention. And as Mark Zuckerberg became the youngest self-made billionaire, Facebook began expanding its income by introducing ways for anyone to advertise. And just like that, the most toxic chapter in fake news had started. It's important to note it wasn't just Facebook who has constantly dealt with this yin-yang balance of profit versus community, but they're the most consistently under fire over the next few years. And as Donald Trump announces he's running for president, it'd be hard to create a more fitting person from scratch, really. A billionaire playboy with a personality bigger than his holdings portfolio. Anything Trump is getting clicks. And as Hillary accepts the Democratic nomination, social media sites like Facebook sat back and counted ad revenue as they allowed stories like Pizzagate to flood our timelines. The culmination of almost 60 years of distrust and media bias and a misunderstood online economy would litter the post-mortem of the 2016 election with a perceived controversy that was supposedly orchestrated by Russian troll farms. And while it's hard to see any of these fake stories about Hillary Clinton being helpful, she held a news conference on December 8th, and she said this.
The epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year.
The now infamous phrase was a page right out of the Barry Goldwater playbook. They began looking for a boogeyman in biased or fake news media, and the term stuck. Reporters were hypothesizing, what if, searching high and low for answers, and Trump took notice. Which brings me back to this video.
Don't be rude. No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
Go.
This would be the first time Donald Trump publicly used the term. But when Trump said it, he wasn't referring to troll farms or fake online stories. He directed it straight at CNN, and a trend began to grow within his base. Don't like what they said? Fake news. Someone has a different opinion? Fake news. For the first time in political history, the distrust of mainstream media had been fully weaponized against any contrary viewpoint. So, I guess the final question remains, what is fake news? On a literal level, it's just that. False, not real, made up. It's an easy to understand bumper sticker as tagline. It's a new type of identity politics, a simple calling card. But it's a hyper-marginalization of a real problem, and one with serious side effects in our society. And as we struggle to find balance, we find ourselves at odds with the very people who the Founding Fathers made sure to include in the document that gives each and every one of us the freedoms we have. The freedom of both citizens and press to criticize the government. As Franklin Roosevelt once said, freedom of consciousness, of education, of speech, of assembly are among the very fundamentals of democracy, and all of them would be nullified should freedom of the press ever be successfully challenged.